Welcome to Clienting, the place to get information about legal marketing and client development in the digital age. Here are your hosts, Guy Sakalakis and Kelly Street.
Hey, Guy.
Hi, Kelly.
Another episode of Clienting.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. All right. I am so excited. Of course. Always say that, but it's always true. And I am so excited today to talk to Yev Muchnik. I met her about a year ago with a project that she was working on then. And there's been so much happening in her life since then. Awesome stuff to talk about. And I can't wait to dive in. So, Yev, why don't you introduce yourself and tell our listeners all the cool stuff you've got going on?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me on. I'm Yev Muchnik, and I have really just taken kind of a snowball approach into building out my practice, building out this new venture that I was working on over the last 15 months, which is called ESQ Legal. And that was focused on co-working for transactional attorneys and tech companies. And now I've sort of gone into another million different directions just out of that experience. So yeah, I'm doing what I love. I'm very happy doing what I do. And every day is bringing in new opportunities and exciting things.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining us today. And so why don't you give listeners a little bit of what you were doing before your most recent ventures, just so they have some context, because we're going to dive into some things that I'm sure listeners will have a lot of questions about. It might be new for some of them. So your background was advising startups as a corporate attorney, or am I totally wrong?
Pretty close. So I've been practicing for almost 11 years. I started my career with Squire Patton Boggs. They used to be known Squire, Sanders, and Dempsey. I started at their Moscow Russian Federation office and was in their corporate and private equity and white collar practice groups. Then I moved over to their DC office. From that, I decided to start a family. So it was, as you know, in big law, very difficult to balance your career and your family needs and requirements. So from that, I started doing a little bit of consulting to some large law firms on their anti-corruption and FCPA practice groups and coming in and doing that. And then from there, I got recruited as general counsel to a publicly traded tech company in Reston, Virginia. And then did have another baby in between there. Started moonlighting as general counsel to a private aviation tech startup out of Florida called JetSmarter. Was part of their kind of founding team. And then they ended up growing. We raised a couple of rounds of pretty significant rounds of financing for them and ended up moving over to South Florida and stayed with them for a little while and then decided to go off on my own and kind of always had that entrepreneurial legal spirit and couldn't shy away from that and, you know, kind of drafting contracts and wanting to be really a part of the negotiations and the strategy. And so that's what I did. I moved back to Colorado, which has always been home base for me, and decided to start ESQ Legal and pursue my own solo practice as well.
Awesome. Well, congratulations.
Yes, that's a lot of stuff and just a budding career so far, really.
It's been fast and fun and ever-changing.
So first, let's talk about ESQ Legal and kind of how that started. And that's how I originally met you, was through that, touring the space and seeing when it was a physical location, all about ESQ Legal. And I was blown away by your ideas and how amazing it was. So let's get into that.
Yeah. So ESQ Legal was really motivated by this notion of a solo practice really being an island for a lot of attorneys, and just seeing, also witnessing in big law how much depression and how big that burnout rate was in big law, and then people trying to move into a solo practice or even a medium-sized firm and just really never finding their footing or that kind of collaborative spirit that did exist in big law, albeit, you know, there's so much pressure from everything else. So seeing the need for that. Also, when I started ESQ Legal was kind of at the time when co-working spaces were sprouting up, and having kind of industry-focused co-working space really made sense because you could really utilize or take value from the different practice groups that you could bring in together. So the vision was always to provide attorneys with a space that they enjoyed going to, that they could pool off shared resources, that they, you know, getting back to enjoying your work, enjoying your practice, and remembering why you went into the practice of law to begin with, and also very much client and consumer facing and providing that access. As Kelly, you saw at ESQ Legal, it was a retail level. The space is very inviting. It was kind of anti-mahogany. So it's kind of the typical, law firm. I mean, now law firms are a lot more modern, obviously, but, just that going against the status quo, making lawyers more accessible so that you could truly just come through the door and say, I need a trust, or I need to raise money, or I need a trademark, or whatever it was. And you would have that all in one space, and you'd also have it in a way that, coming in there knowing that these are modern lawyers, that people that practice on, unbundled services or fixed fees, just everything against the traditional legal model and benefiting both sides.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think one of the things that, whether it's at ESQ Legal or, WeWork, another co-working space, that lawyers should think about in terms of serving their clients is that there's an expectation. A lot of these clients come to you with an expectation that they can get this more like full service, or they can get things outside of the practice where they have the main relationship. And so something like a co-working space gives you that ability to be able to, whether it's a referral relationship or whether it's something more formal. I've always really thought that was smart because you're meeting the consumers where they are with what they want and their demand, supplying that demand in that co-working space without having to build, committing to a 10-year lease of 10,000 square feet and mahogany this and mahogany that. So I think that's great. And I think that for listeners, even if you have a primary office, it might make sense just for the community networking and partnership and referral aspects to be thinking about looking at something like ESQ Legal or a WeWork or other co-working space just from the client and networking aspects.
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many different benefits there. And, it's a real problem. So today I actually went to a new initiative that's being heralded by the Colorado Bar Association, and it's called the Legal Revolution. And it's addressing the fact that so many lawyers are just unhappy where they're at, or kind of the traditional pathway out of law school doesn't fit and everyone anymore. And it's not, it's very multifaceted at the moment. And that you can actually have a successful solo practice going into an environment like this and being able to find mentors as well to, in the same way that you would have a partner that would kind of guide you through it. I think a lot of attorneys, whether they're in the mid-range of their career or they're more senior, they're happy to bring kind of a junior on and say, happy to educate you and to kind of school you and to bring you up to speed with everything that I know, to share my knowledge. So value and benefit out of that kind of collaborative environment, especially for attorneys. It's such a high rate of depression and drug use and alcohol abuse. And I always quote that Harvard study that came out maybe a year and a half ago, citing the benefits of co-working and co-working spaces, that people just are more satisfied in their careers and their lives. It's pervasive.
Yeah. I mean, I am a solo remote worker. We have parts of our team that are in other parts of the country, but mostly they're in Chicago. And then I'm all by myself in Minneapolis. And I definitely find that it's great that I am not just working from home. And when I go have lunch, I can go sit and talk to other people that we don't at all work at the same company. Sometimes I don't even know what they do, but it's just oh, hey, I see you every day.
Absolutely.
Relationship building.
So obviously a comment must be made about how cold you must be at the moment in Minneapolis.
I think we're colder in Chicago right now.
Yeah. I think Guy and I are both freezing.
We're colder than Antarctica today.
That's what I saw. Yeah. And Siberia too.
And I checked this out. The average surface temperature of Mars is -81, and we're supposed to have wind chills of -65. So we're getting pretty close. It's like Mars here. Get outside.
That's insane.
Move to Chicago today.
Yeah, don't maybe.
Chicago Tourism Bureau.
So one of the other things I want to talk about quick with the idea of a legal co-working space is something that I've heard the managers of the spaces that I'm in are talking about how difficult it is to get lawyers to come into the space because there are all these issues about the ethics of using a co-working space, and they're worried about whether or not clients would feel comfortable. So do you have any insight on that? Because Guy and I have talked a lot about and clienting about, hey, lawyers, go find a co-working space. It can be great for you for networking, but there are issues.
Absolutely. So, I mean, that's definitely been often cited by attorneys coming in and looking for space. But We're lucky here in Colorado, and I think the District of Columbia as well. There, in our Supreme Court and Office of Attorney Regulations did come out with ethics opinions blessing the concept, saying that it didn't violate any kind of professional responsibility rules. We took the kind of added level step of having members sign NDAs as well when they were signing their membership agreements. Just kind of preserving that, introducing an additional level of security from a contractual perspective. But obviously, I mean, just from a functional perspective, privacy screens and white noise, pink noise, making sure that you're kind of enclosed in your conference rooms and conference areas for mediators, just taking those additional steps, which I would think that most co-working spaces have anyway, just, from a noise level containment perspective. But I would say that's the biggest one. And having those ethics opinions really help calm people's concerns with respect to confidentiality and ethics responsibilities.
Absolutely. So let's talk about what you're doing now. I mean, one of the things. So the first thing, I know that Guy is going to be really excited about this one because probably more than I am, just because I honestly don't understand it as much, but that is your blockchain and blockchain lawyering.
Yep. So, I mean, a new practice area has basically been developed or born out of all of the blockchain technology and innovation that has come about in the last, really it started in about 2009, maybe arguably even earlier, but in the last 10 years. And lawyers have sort of, found their way around it and made a practice area out of it as well. And mostly it's comprised of securities and corporate law, but there's definitely an art to the technology surrounding the space and having that vocabulary to make sure that you kind of are on the same level as your clients and knowing what a smart contract is or a protocol or anything else is really helpful. So yeah, it's very exciting. I just spoke at the Sundance Film Festival on Friday on a blockchain panel, which was incredibly exciting with some really, really intelligent fund managers and developers. And I'm just such a big tech nerd. And so this was my way of entering into that conversation as a lawyer and not as a technologist or anything else. And the blockchain community, they're very inclusive and it's been a great way to learn and kind of keep up with all of the innovation that's happening. So it's been a fun ride. I've had a lot of really fun speaking opportunities and speaking at South by Southwest as well in March. So it's just been a nice roller coaster. But again, very much believe in the technology and also how a huge potential disruptor for the legal industry as well, from the perspective of housing things on the blockchain for lawyers and being able to document and evidence things to smart contracts and the rest. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a natural fit, blockchain and lawyering, in fact. It gets the technology of documenting and chain of custody and all that kind of stuff out of the way because it's just kind of happening in the background. I mean, another thing I'm really curious about, and I think listeners that tune in to get client development, is I think your experience is really interesting because, like you said, this is a practice area that's basically just been born. And so in some ways, I imagine that some of the more traditional networking relationship building stuff is still completely relevant, participating in the communities. But in other ways, the how that you're having those conversations is probably a lot different than, the historical places and ways that lawyers entered communities to try to market their services. So I'd really be curious about what types of tools, communities, places, organizations you found have been effective for meeting new people that whether they become referrers or whether they become clients themselves, and even just like kind of the big picture ones. Like I know that there's a very active blockchain community on Twitter. And so I'd just be kind of curious. I think listeners would benefit, especially whether they're pursuing something blockchain or not. I think there's going to be continuing a lot of emerging new practice areas. And I think listeners would benefit from kind of hearing your thoughts in this exciting new practice area of how you're actually on the ground out there meeting new people and having these conversations.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's been such a huge boost to my solo practice, just relocating back from Florida, establishing new contacts here and establishing a new name for myself. And blockchain has been just a blessing for me because it's been an easy entry point. And there are still very few good blockchain attorneys. And, the startups and the founders will admit to that. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're a blockchain attorney. We've been looking for one. So you either, and again, at least from an accessibility perspective, so you do have a lot of the larger firms stepping in and seeing that they can monetize that practice group and that new technology. But it's again kind of speaking to the solos and the mid-sized practices. Yeah. So, some of the access points for me in Colorado have been Meetups, which have been a very successful way of meeting new potential clients and also just learning and being part of that community, because above and beyond, you really have to kind of subscribe to that distributed mentality, and that fit very much in line with ESQ Legal, actually, just because of that collaborative distributed lawyering concept. So for me, again, very natural fit. But the meetups, Colorado is very lucky. We have a very, very active community. And then attending conferences, whether it's local and state conferences or around the country or even around the world. One of the big conferences that's coming up here in Colorado is ETH Denver, and it was a very successful conference and hackathon last year, and it's supposed to be even bigger. And I'm speaking at that, so come and join us. But just again, I'm not much of a sales person, and I think a lot of lawyers are kind of crippled by going out and having to sell their services. And I'm not a good salesperson, but just taking a true interest and curiosity in this developing space really makes you stand out, and there's just room for that. So yeah, Twitter is a great place. There's tons of Facebook groups. There's Slack channels. I mean, it's just a plethora of opportunity there. But, obviously, again, I would kind of say that with a grain of salt, just stay away from the kind of sales gimmicks that lawyers are associated with and that give lawyers a bad name, and really be there to try to learn something and be, genuine with your presence as any kind of provider. I think that's true for any kind of service provider.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of your speaking, that's one of the things that I'm seeing you're doing a lot. Is that kind of the main thing you've looked at for building out your reputation and how you can find clients?
I mean, I haven't actively been seeking it out, but I've just stumbled into it just by being present. And then, one person introduces you to the next person and they say, oh, we have this speaking opportunity or this judging opportunity or whatever it is for a hackathon. So it's by sheer pure luck, and I've been very lucky with that. So yeah, but I obviously that's a fantastic entry point as well. And as I said, there are very few kind of experts in this area, so I don't think it's as difficult as it is in other practice groups to make yourself stand out and at least choose a particular point of law or particular point of the technology that you can specialize in. There's everything from smart contracts to governance to finance and funding options. So
are you running into a lot of issues with there just isn't any precedent for this practice area? And so you're having to kind of build out like, okay, I know this is what the rule is and it can't work for this. So how do we fix it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the law is still very murky. I think it's been called the Wild Wild West. I think we are getting a little bit more clarity from some of the regulatory bodies, both state and federal. But yeah, I mean, we've just basically been drawing analogies to the traditional securities law and trying to, fit a hole into a square peg or whatever that saying is. But I think everybody's been frustrated by that and asking for more guidance. And unfortunately, I've said this on a number of panels, the kind of slowness, and there's a reason for it. There's a lack of resources within our regulatory bodies. So, but they're not moving as fast as the technology companies and innovation is. So it's driving a lot of innovation outside of our country, and people are seeking capital and seeking to establish, domicile themselves in other jurisdictions because they're seen as more friendly in this space. So like Malta and Switzerland, Gibraltar, to name a few. I mean, we have had Wyoming is doing a great job in being progressive. I think Puerto Rico as well was trying to establish itself as a blockchain kind of center. So yeah, you're constantly having to double check and draw analogies and do a ton of disclaimers.
Right. I think another thing too that you're probably experiencing more than lawyers in other practice areas is this idea of the expectations of your clients for tech savviness. So that's a theme that comes up all the time. But I imagine that most of your clients don't have a lot of time and patience for inefficient communication and inefficient document sharing. That's, I think, becoming a reality for, well, really all lawyers eventually. Maybe tell us a little bit about how you solve some of those problems in terms of client communication and what's your preferred methodology for, if it's client portals, document sharing, practice management software. I don't imagine that you have a lot of red ropes and paper floating around.
No, I try to be as much of a virtual office as possible. And I think some clients appreciate it and some are very much used to their corporate binder kind of thing. And that's exactly what they want. And that's fine too. But yeah, I mean, one of the biggest concerns is security and finding the right cloud storage mechanisms and file management systems for providing kind of secure storage. As far as case management software, I utilize my case. I don't know if incredibly efficiently or not, but I definitely utilize it. And just kind of anything else that I can pick up, like Hello, Sign, and Zoom, and Signal for communications by text messages. It's the most secure communication resource that's out there at the moment. And yeah, I mean, I'm, as I said, very much drawn to new technology. So anything that's better than the previous version, I love to try out. But sometimes it's just you get overwhelmed with the amount of options there are, and it's hard to navigate through that.
Yeah, I used the Signal app the other day, actually, for the first time for a phone call, and it was super easy. You just, you download it, you put your own phone number in. And so if anybody is out there looking for text messaging or secure phone call app, Signal is great. I can also attest to it.
And it's funny, it was just on this panel at Sundance, and one of the panelists had actually said it's the only thing that Republicans and like true tech hippies out of Silicon Valley can agree on as being the most secure kind of communication methodology out there.
Perfect. So. Makes everyone happy. All right. So then kind of your more current venture apart from the blockchain, or is it the same as, is it your blockchain practices Launch Legal?
Yeah. So that's just my personal practice. Okay. Yeah. The other thing I think I had mentioned to you before, Kelly, is so one of the new companies that I have actually just joined is a legal tech company called Citizen Company, and I joined as their chief product officer. So what we're doing through that company is grading consumer contracts and using AI and blockchain to be able to provide consumers with a little bit more purchasing power and knowledge about some of the terms of use that they're entering into on a daily basis and privacy terms that are applicable to them in a more kind of coherent, clear manner.
Oh, that's so cool. That reminds me of last week. Oh gosh, was it already last week? Maybe it was 2 weeks ago now. I was on a panel for New York Legal Tech, and it was all about kind of scaling your law firm using technology. And one of the people I met at that event was a gentleman who has a startup, and they go through contracts and pull out specific like dates, information to give reminder and that sort of, like reminder dates of, oh, hey, if it's an employment lawyer, your client's rent is due on that date or something like that. And it was just really interesting. But one of the things that I asked him about, because he's been in other professional services as clients so far and is just getting into the legal space. I was like, what about the ethics of, something else mining, like even if it's AI, mining a contract? Because does that break the lawyer-client confidentiality if it's not the lawyer who's looking through or the paralegal who's looking through the contract?
Right. Very valid point. So I think a lot of those issues are going to be dissected by the ABA or whomever the ethics committees. Yeah, I mean, the same issue comes up in blockchain with the inability to remove your data under the GDPR, because blockchain is all about an immutable ledger. And so if you can't opt out or somehow ask to remove your data, how do you comply with the GDPR?
So many issues around this stuff.
Yeah, so topical, I guess. But it's interesting. It's going to be an interesting time. I mean, I don't think we can turn our backs on technology at this point. We've come too far, and there's just too many proven advantages with having technology make us more efficient, make us more accountable, and provide a better service level to clients. So, I mean, I know that a lot of attorneys and other service providers very much feel threatened by technology, but you really have to shift your thinking when it comes to it. See it as an additional tool that you have at your disposal to make you have more superpowers.
Yeah, it's so funny how that, it's kind of always been true, but it seems like in this round of technological advancement, it's like particularly true. And I don't know if that's everybody's just feeling the looming oncoming singularity or something. But in the past, lawyers don't tend to feel as threatened by, say, their cell phones. But there's no question that, like you said, I think that the real missed opportunity here is that at the end of the day, the legal services consumers are going to be a big part of driving that, because they're going to have expectations, and the lawyers that are insisting upon avoiding technology altogether the clients are going to be making the choices not to be working with those lawyers. And especially if you're obviously in a practice area where you're working in technology, it's kind of a no-brainer. But even, we talk about this with estate planning and criminal defense, and family law is a great one. And so, it's funny that in some ways it's like some things never change, but this particular round seems particularly threatening to lawyers. And so one of the things that we always talk about is that, I think that in terms of the staying relevant, and if you want to future-proof your practice, it's really not an option to at least understand some of even just the basic technologies, let alone, you're on the bleeding edge with blockchain.
I mean, I definitely agree. A lot of lawyers just feel that it's, technology is daunting, marketing is daunting, and, ultimately we are supposed to just be practicing our craft and reading the black letter of the law. But in reality, it's not like that. And you have to equip yourself. And if, just like anything else, if it's something that you're not proficient in or that's daunting to you, then you find an advisor, you find resources in your bar association or national resources. They exist, right? So it's just how much you want to push yourself to access those resources. Just like when typing on computers came out and like people were pushing back on learning how to, type quickly enough, but you have to do it. Yeah.
I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head for me. It's about the using technology as part of your service offering, not against it. And so that ties nicely into what I know, another thing we've talked about that you're working on, and that is the access to justice and your work with the Modern Law Practice Initiative with the Colorado Bar Association.
Yeah, so we have been trying to target a lot of law students actually as a way of educating them that this is a normal practice, that you can unbundle legal services. So some of the initiatives that we've done through the Modern Law Practice Initiative have been at DU Law School, and then there's one coming up at CU Law School where we do these kind of vignettes and play out different circumstances where this would be applicable. We've got someone from the Office of Attorney Regulations that participates in that group as well. So he touches upon the ethical considerations of unbundling legal services. And it's really exciting just to see students, that are also sort of being educated in a very traditional environment and kind of the traditional legal methodologies it's like an eye-opener for them. And they're like, wow, I didn't realize that I could do that. And I didn't realize that people did that. So again, and it speaks to making legal services more accessible, stepping down from the ivory tower. And, if somebody can't afford to do estate planning all at once and spend whatever it is, $5,000 to $10,000, that they could do it piecemeal. I ran into somebody recently, an attorney that was actually kind of unbundling it by offering group sessions and making it more affordable to people. So, yeah.
Yeah, we actually interviewed Shreya Lay. We had her on from the Lay Roots law firm there in Tacoma, and we had her on a couple of episodes ago, and she and her husband and business partner, they do things like that where they will have a big kind of group session, and they'll help people with their estate planning kind of all for a smaller fee in one big room. And it's kind of a group think and also educational thing. But then the people are more filling it out themselves and kind of they're empowered, but they're also getting the thing they want at a lower cost that they're more able to afford.
The other thing that I think is overlooked, it's both the right thing to do and also from a selfish standpoint and solving some of the access to justice issue is that you're building these relationships with people who are going to naturally become champions of your practice, whether that's referring to friends and family, other people that they, might need some kind of service that you had. And so I think that's another aspect to all of this that lawyers tend to be at least resisted in the past. Maybe they're becoming more embracing of it now, is that solving some of these access to justice issues, whether it's unbundling or otherwise, is actually good business practice. It's great from there's the obvious PR aspects of it, but it's also a way to put people and develop relationships with people that can be clients in the future, or know people who can become clients in the future, because, life is filled with quasi-life legal issues that you don't anticipate. And so I think that's just another aspect from a client development standpoint, that lawyers should really be embracing and not so resistant to the lawyers that are still demanding, it's $500 for 30 minutes of my time on the phone. There might be a place for that with a certain segment of the legal services consumer industry, but for a lot of people, there's this untapped amount of business that's available for those lawyers that are embracing that.
I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, those are just basic tenets of relationship building, right? And they just seem very logical. So another kind of practice or service as part of my services coming into startup companies that I offer is that I tend to join their Slack channels. So, they can always ping me. And I'm at fault a lot of making myself a little bit too available. But I enjoy it. When you enjoy what you do, it doesn't come off as work. And I would, if somebody's like, yeah, just, pay attention to this one thing that we're stuck on before we can move to so many other things. And they ping me, or the Slack notification comes up, and it's like, it's like a 5-second answer. And I would never charge for that. And again, it's just because of that goodwill. It's because of, I'd prefer to be your lifelong counsel and be part of the various evolution of this venture, if not this venture, then the next, or how serial entrepreneurs do it. But yeah, I much prefer to provide that value add than 6-minute increments of time.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I think that's extremely valuable for listeners, especially those that tend to take the shorter view. And it's funny because it's intuitive for you, and yet so many times we hear the opposite of where, I would never do that. I would never make myself that accessible. I would never offer my time without getting paid for it. But again, I think it's short-sighted, and I think that the biggest driver here is going to be the expectations of clients. I even see it, my friends at Big Law. If it's happening in Big Law, it's happening everywhere. And so it's refreshing to hear your take on it. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah. It sounds more like you have they also get a bad rap. So I kind of hate to use them example, but like financial planners, they think of it more as like a starting investment, even if somebody is just, you're managing like 1% of their money. When they're, as they're aging and they're getting close to retirement, they'll have more and more funds to be able to invest or different things to do. And you have to think of, especially for more transactional lawyers, like think about those relationships as an investment, and just kind of what can you provide to them? What would they need in the future? How long could this relationship last? All the good stuff.
And I would say, on some level, it is more intuitive and probably easier for transactional attorneys to tap into that, rather than, I think, maybe kind of family and criminal lawyers probably struggle more with how to do that. So, but there is a movement, and I'm sure it's not just native to Colorado, that people are advocating for this type of service.
Awesome. Well, we certainly appreciate your time today. How can listeners who have questions about blockchain and the law, co-working spaces, and access to justice get a hold of you and find you online?
Sure. So I'm available. You can always email me at yev@launch-legal.com. And my website is www.techlawstartup.com.
Cool. Thank you so much. And as always, listeners, if you know a lawyer who's doing really cool stuff in the marketing and client development universe, send them our way. Or if that happens to be you, send yourself our way. And make sure to subscribe. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Yev.